You wake up early, maybe before the sun even comes up. You get ready, grab your coffee, and head into another long day of work. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're responsible. You're disciplined. You don't waste money like you used to. You've cut back on things you don't need. Maybe you've even started saving, maybe investing a little. And yet, when you check your bank account, it doesn't feel different. Sure, it's not empty anymore, but it's also not growing in a way that actually changes your life. You're still thinking about bills, still calculating expenses, still feeling like one unexpected problem could set you back. Look, that's the frustrating part, because it feels like you're running but not really getting anywhere. Meanwhile, you see other people talking about investing, building wealth, hitting milestones, and you start asking yourself a quiet question you don't always say out loud. What am I doing wrong? Here's the thing. You're probably not doing anything wrong at all. My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, I've been exactly where you are, doing the work, trying to be responsible, making smart decisions, but still feeling like nothing is really changing. And that's what makes this so confusing. Because no one tells you that financial progress, especially in the beginning, feels incredibly slow. Almost painfully slow, so you start questioning everything. Your strategy, your discipline, even yourself. Now you might be thinking, maybe I just don't earn enough. Maybe I started too late. Maybe investing just isn't for me. But here's what most people don't realize. The problem usually isn't your effort. It's your expectations. And once you understand how money actually grows over time, you stop feeling stuck and start seeing progress in a completely different way. So let's talk about the advice you've probably heard over and over again. Just save consistently. Invest in index funds. Be patient. Live below your means. Look, none of this is bad advice. In fact, it's exactly what you should be doing. But here's the problem. This advice sounds simple, but it doesn't feel complete when you're actually living it. Because no one tells you what it feels like in the beginning. You follow all the rules. You stay disciplined. You delay gratification. And still, your life doesn't really change. Now you might be thinking, isn't this supposed to work by now? That's the trap. Here's what most people don't realize. This advice is built for the long term, but you're experiencing it in the short term. And in the short term, it feels slow. It feels unrewarding. It feels like nothing is happening. So people quit, not because the strategy is wrong, but because the feedback is invisible. And that's where most people fall off. So let's pause for a second and look at reality, because this part matters more than people think. According to data from the Federal Reserve, a large percentage of people don't even have enough savings to cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. Think about that. Not $4,000, just $400. And it gets even more interesting. The median savings for most households is surprisingly low, far lower than what social media makes it seem like. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about net worth? Here's the thing. Wealth in this country is extremely uneven. A huge portion of total wealth is concentrated at the very top, meaning most people are not even close to that $1 million mark. So when you feel behind, when you feel like you're not moving fast enough, look, you're actually much closer to the average than you think. But here's what most people don't realize. Being average financially still feels stressful. Because average doesn't mean secure. Average doesn't mean free. And that's why just following the crowd rarely gets you where you actually want to go. All right, let's break this down with actual numbers, because this is where things start to click. Let's say you're doing what everyone recommends. You save and invest $500 every single month. No skipping, no excuses. And let's assume a reasonable average return of around 7% per year. Sounds solid, right? Now here's the reality. After 10 years of doing this consistently, you end up with roughly $86,000. That's not nothing, but it probably doesn't feel life-changing. Now you keep going. After 20 years, you're sitting at around $260,000. Better, but still not close to $1 million. This is where most people start feeling stuck, because you've been disciplined for 2 decades, and you're still not there. Now here's where it gets really interesting. You don't double your effort, but your results start accelerating anyway. By year 30, you're around $600,000. And just a few years later, you finally cross that $1 million mark. Same behavior, same effort. but completely different outcome. That's the power of compounding, and also why it feels so slow, until suddenly it doesn't. Now this is where everything starts to shift, because once you hit that first million, the game changes completely. Look, up until this point, most of your progress came from you, your discipline, your savings, your consistency. But now, your money starts doing the heavy lifting. At a 7% return, a $1 million portfolio generates about $70,000 per year. Think about that for a second. That's not coming from your job. That's not coming from extra effort. That's just growth. Now you might be thinking, wait, that's almost like another salary. Exactly. And here's what most people don't realize. When your investments start generating more than what you can realistically save each year, everything accelerates. Your contributions matter less. Time matters more. And compounding finally becomes visible. This is where it gets really interesting, because your next $1 million doesn't require starting over. You're building on momentum, and momentum in finance is everything. Let me give you a simple way to think about this. Imagine you're trying to push a car. At the very beginning, it's heavy. It barely moves. You're putting in a lot of effort and getting almost nothing in return. That's exactly what building wealth feels like in the early stage. You're saving. You're investing. You're doing everything right. But the results? They feel small. Now you might be thinking, why does it have to be this hard in the beginning? Here's the thing. At zero momentum, everything depends on your effort. But once the car starts moving, even just a little, it changes. It's still not easy. But now your effort actually translates into progress. And then something interesting happens. As the car picks up speed, it becomes easier to keep it moving than to start it from scratch. This is where it gets really interesting. Eventually, you're no longer struggling to push it forward. You're just guiding it. That's what compounding does. It doesn't remove effort, but it multiplies it over time. And that's why the beginning feels so slow. But the later stages feel almost unfairly fast. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Because the biggest challenge here isn't math. It's psychology. Look, your brain is not designed for long-term wealth building. It's designed for survival, for immediate rewards. That's why instant gratification feels so powerful. Spending money today feels real. Saving for 20 years, that feels abstract. So even when you know what to do, you don't always do it. And then there's loss aversion. Here's what most people don't realize. Losing money hurts about twice as much as gaining money feels good. So when your investments drop, even temporarily, it feels like something is wrong. People panic, they sell, they reset their progress. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but I'd just hold. Maybe, but it's different when it's your money. And then there's the most dangerous one, invisible progress. In the early stages, your growth is real, but it doesn't feel real. No lifestyle change, no visible reward. So your brain starts questioning the process. And that's exactly why most people stop right before things start working. Here's what most people don't realize. Wealth doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows in phases. And if you don't understand which phase you're in, everything starts to feel confusing. Let's break it down. Phase 1 is survival and stability. This is where you're just trying to get control, paying off debt, building an emergency fund, learning discipline. Progress here feels slow, because it is. Then comes Phase 2, accumulation. Now you're consistently investing. You're increasing your income. You're starting to build assets. It still doesn't feel exciting, but something is quietly building in the background. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Phase 3 is acceleration. Your investments start to grow faster. Compounding becomes noticeable. Opportunities begin to show up. And finally, Phase 4, leverage. Your money is working harder than you are. You're making bigger moves. Growth starts to feel exponential. Look, most people quit in Phase 1 or 2, not because it doesn't work, but because they never stay long enough to reach the part where it does. Now let's talk about one of the biggest questions people struggle with. Should you invest or pay off your debt? Look, this isn't just a math problem. It's also a psychological one. But let's start with the numbers. If you have high-interest debt, something like 10%, 15%, even 20%, here's the thing. Paying that off is one of the best investments you can make, because that interest is guaranteed. There's no volatility, no uncertainty. If you keep that debt, you're effectively losing money every single year. Now you might be thinking, what if my debt is low interest? Good question. If your debt is around 3% to 5%, now the math starts to shift. Historically, the stock market returns around 7% annually. So technically, investing could outperform your debt. But here's what most people don't realize. Being debt-free changes your behavior. Less stress, more flexibility, better decision-making. So the right answer isn't always maximizing returns. It's choosing the path you can actually stick with, because consistency beats perfection, every time. All right, so what do you actually do with all of this? Because understanding the system is one thing, but applying it is what really matters. Look, you don't need a perfect strategy. You need a strategy you can follow consistently. Step 1, build a financial floor. This means having an emergency fund, ideally covering 3 to 6 months of expenses. And if you have high-interest debt, focus on eliminating that first. This reduces stress and gives you stability. Step 2, increase your income. Here's what most people don't realize. In the early stages, income matters more than investment returns. If you're saving $200 a month versus $1,000 a month, that difference compounds massively over time. So focus on skills. Career growth. Side income. Step 3, automate your investing. Set it up so money flows into investments without you thinking about it. Make it boring. That's how it works. Step 4, track your net worth, not just your income. Wealth isn't about what you earn. It's about what you keep and grow. And finally, stay in the game. Because none of this works if you stop too early. Let me leave you with this. Your first $100,000 will feel hard. Your first $500,000 will feel slow. And your first $1 million, it will feel almost impossible. Not because it's unrealistic, but because the process tests your patience more than your ability. Look, most people don't fail because they're bad with money. They fail because they expect results too soon. They want visible progress in a phase where progress is still invisible. So they stop. Now you might be thinking, what if I'm too late? Here's the thing. You're not late, you're just early in the process. And that process is supposed to feel uncomfortable. This is where it gets really interesting, because the people who eventually build wealth aren't the smartest. They're not the luckiest. They're just the ones who stayed consistent long enough for compounding to finally show up. And once it does, everything changes. Your money starts working for you. Your effort starts multiplying. Your progress becomes undeniable. So if you feel stuck right now, good. That means you're still in the game. And if you stay in the game long enough, the second million, it won't feel impossible anymore.